Good morning.
Good morning.
I really would like to, before you start, congratulate you to the Stockholm Human Rights Award that you received the other day.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you were interviewed on stage for a while, and I was so happy to hear that you mentioned children very early in that interview, that they need to learn what the meaning of human rights are in early ages.
Yes, precisely. And it has not gone lost on any of us that education on its own, literacy on its own, doesn't mean that you have an ethical human being at the end of the production line of education, formal education. And what we believe is so fundamental is in the earliest stages of education, there is a strong human rights component such that you don't have the early seeds of bigotry, racism, intolerance planted alongside maybe a highly efficient brain, but not a kind brain, not a sympathetic brain. And we have seen time and again terrible atrocities, intolerance, discrimination conducted, put into practice by highly educated people. So the correlation between education, strictly speaking, and kindness is not one that's obvious. It has to be infused with a very deep sense of what human rights mean.
And also, I have to add, there's another thing you can be very proud of, Mr. Zeid. You have a Swedish mother.
Yes.
She's here. She's from Södertälje. Welcome back home. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Your Majesties, Royal Highnesses, ladies and gentlemen, Ulf, I'm sorry for having violated your instruction, but you quickly learn in the human rights movement to speak and then apologize. And that's what I'm going to do. A good morning to all of you, and thank you for inviting me to comment and speak on to such a dynamic and influential audience, the participants and partners of the Global Child Forum. And I have been asked to focus my remarks today on elements that can help our societies manage and solve the migratory movements that have escalated so sharply in the past year around the world, and where they relate to the rights of children. 2 months ago, the international community reacted with shock and disgust, I have to say, at the death of the 3-year-old Syrian boy Ilan al-Kurdi as he drowned trying to cross the Aegean. Since then, at least 77 more children have died in the Mediterranean on their way to Europe. Tens of thousands of other children have also suffered violence and brutality on their long journey northwards through Central America. Unaccounted more have died in the Indian Ocean, fleeing persecution and deprivation in Myanmar and Bangladesh. All told, some 30 million children are on the move today in situations that are desperately precarious. And international law is clear. All children need and deserve protection, whether or not they have visas and whatever the motivations that compelled them to take flight. The rights laid out in the Convention on the Rights of the Child should be guaranteed for migrant children, just as they are for all children under the jurisdiction of every state. Their best interest must be the primary focus of all relevant policies, including policies on immigration. We see them, all of us have seen them, in the streets of many of our cities. Some have braved the enormous danger of the voyage to Europe on their own, and others journey with their families. The perils they experience, including the danger of separation from their parents, the risk of falling into the hands of child traffickers, and severe threats to their lives and health. And some of you may have grown accustomed to the sight of young girls and boys sleeping in disused metro stations under advertisements for luxury travel, or hiding under highways as expensive cars roar above their heads. fending for themselves as best they can in the squalid, muddy camps in the midst of our carefully trimmed landscapes. It is hard to tell what is more intolerable, the suffering and deprivation these children endured in their countries of origin, the fear and often vicious violence they brave on their journey, or the lack of humanity so frequently and shockingly displayed by their host countries. And I am shaken by the reports I read and photos that many of us have seen regarding treatment of migrant children at the borders of states. In many countries, children are being subjected to high levels of violence by border guards, and I'm not only speaking of the Balkan states. Migrant children are also being detained in intolerable conditions for long periods, although we know that the impact of immigration detention on children is often extremely severe. The detention of children because of their migration status is a violation of child rights. Irregular migrant children may also be deprived by law of their rights to fundamental public services. Their often justified fear of detection and deportation also creates barriers to their access to vital services. As a result, across Europe and other parts of the world, and in other parts of the world, many children are going unvaccinated, their mental trauma is going untreated, and many child victims of sexual violence are not being cared for in any way. I'm sure that none of you wishes to see your children grow up knowing that just down the road other children are sleeping sick and unprotected in parks just because they were born in another country. States should also make clear, not only in their legislation, but also, most importantly, in policy and practice, that the principle of the child's best interests takes priority over immigration status and other administrative considerations. I'm also concerned about what happens to migrant and refugee children once they reach 18. From one day to the next, they may be thrown out of government shelters, refused education and training, and deported to countries where they may face danger. And I ask you, are these actions really principled, and are they necessary? There should be a transitional measure, or let's say there should be transitional measures to ensure continuing protection and support. In the course of today's program, you will be discussing many vital topics, and before I leave you, I want to pick up on a few points regarding corporate responsibility for human rights. The best solution to forced migration is to resolve the human rights violations that compel so many families to leave their homes. And all of us can help to support peace and sustainable development to ensure that children can grow up with hope and dignity, and where they live, of course, in societies that are respectful of their rights. All of us in business, in government, and as global citizens can raise our voices to send a positive and principled message on migrants' rights. Thank you, Lydia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zeid. Yes.